Welcome everyone to another quick tutorial on understanding cyber threats. I'd really like to look at the letter S because S is for social engineering. Now, technical controls can be absolutely awesome. Good passwords can be difficult to crack. A well-maintained antivirus package can detect and sanitize most forms of malware, and filters and firewalls can identify and block unauthorized access. Even network segregation can hinder an adversary's ability to run amok on your internal systems. Anyway, faced with such obstacles, many attackers turn to social engineering. So, what is social engineering? Well, according to one of the most famous hackers in the world, social engineering is the casual or calculated manipulation of people in order to influence them to do the things that they would not ordinarily do, or in other words, to trick people. Now, social engineering usually takes two key forms. You either unnerve or frighten the target into acting without thought, or you seek a social connection or bond that puts them off their guard. Some adversaries are very good at both, but let's just take a minute or two to kind of break down those concepts even further. Some social engineers often claim positions of authority to intimidate the victim into giving them access. We call that the authority principle. Alternatively, they may act belligerently if you deny them, often telling you that there's going to be some sort of unpleasant financial or legal consequences if you don't do what they say, which is the intimidation principle. Conversely, they may be very personable or seek common interest to create a bond between you and them, hence the familiarity principle. They may also cite professional credentials, known organizational information to create a feeling of trust or the trust principle. They may also try to make a social connection, claiming that you both know someone and that person can vouch for your authenticity. We call this the social proof principle. Finally, a social engineer might claim that a situation is urgent or that they've got very little time to confirm their identity or go through normal security procedures. And we call that the urgency principle or the security principle. Now, what I'd really like you to do is to have a good look at those principles that I've just talked about. And then what I want you to do is pause the tutorial and go watch the YouTube video clip that I'm suggesting. It is a phenomenal bit of footage and I guarantee you won't regret it. But just have a look at the clip and see how many of these principles this girl is using in her ruse. Okay, do that now. Okay, so what we have here are some of the different types of social engineering used by adversaries. What I'd like you to do is pause the video again and take a moment to see if you're familiar with any of these terms and what they might mean. Okay, give that a go now. Lovely. Let's now define a few of these terms. Let's start with blagging in the bottom right-hand corner. Blagging is simply convincing someone to hand over sensitive information or to permit unauthorized access. Phishing. Phishing are emails that encourage you to download a harmful file or follow a link to a website. Sometimes that website will host malicious malware and try to infect your system, and sometimes it wants you to type in username and passwords so that these credentials can be captured and reused by the attacker. If you download malware from a phishing email, either by visiting an infected site or downloading and running an attachment, you could be in real trouble. Spear phishing. These emails are entirely convincing because the attacker has really done their homework and researched the employee or the organization. This data has been taken from publicly accessible records or internet sources, such as company websites or someone's social media profile, something like that. It's called spear phishing because the emails are specifically targeted. Whaling. Again, this is no different from phishing. However, this time the intended victim is somebody with privileged access within the company or has the ability to authorize important transactions. They are the bigger targets, the bigger fish, so to speak. Whaling emails are directed at senior leadership teams and company directors. Vishing. It's when someone rings you up and tries to convince you to give away important personal details or credentials for the purposes of identity fraud. Failing that, a fraudulent payment will do. Shouldering. This is someone just looking over your shoulder to steal confidential information. We think of shouldering an awful lot when we type our PIN into an ATM machine. Baiting. A really good example of baiting might be to leave an infected USB on the floor where someone might pick it up and plug it in. I wanted to show you a typical phishing email. Gone are the days when these things were littered with dodgy spelling and severe grammatical issues. These days, phishing emails can look incredibly convincing. This email, purporting to be from the Greater Manchester Police, is for a speeding fine. Notice the link at the bottom. If you click that link and download the file, your system will be infected with malware. It's really sneaky. As a little aside, I wonder if you want to just pause the video for a minute and see if you can spot the telltale signs that this is bogus. Okay, look at who the email is from and the vehicle speed and the actual speed limit. So how do we mitigate the problem of phishing? Well, phishing emails in all their various guises usually have telltale signs. For example, spelling, grammar or formatting errors all smack of unprofessionalism when the email purports to be from an official entity. Again, close inspection of the from field at the top of the email might reveal subtle differences to what you might expect to see. Be very careful of transposition errors here. For example, the bcb.co.uk is not quite the same as the bbc.co.uk. Unfortunately, transposition errors are really hard to spot because our brains will read what should be there instead of what actually is there. You should also hover the mouse over any links. This will tell you where the hyperlink goes as a pop-up. If it looks like spaghetti, it's probably fake. Again, watch for malicious attachments. Never open anything that ends in .exe, which is an executable file. Be very careful of Office documents that require macros to run. Don't open them unless you know the source. Always ask, how does this email deviate from normal procedure? For example, are payments usually requested in this manner? And finally, there are plenty of free services out there that will allow a company to run a phishing simulation. Trust me, nothing will help staff to recognize dubious messages like a phishing campaign. So how do we stop phishing? Well, ask yourself this. What type of organization calls you and asks for credentials? If someone rings you up and says, I don't believe I'm talking to the real you, give me sensitive details to prove it, then you should be instantly suspicious. Secondly, look for someone using those principles we talked about earlier on. Thirdly, no matter how friendly or stressful the call might seem, just take a minute to ask yourself, A, is this call expected? And B, how can I contact the company or the individual through official, well-known channels? Keep an eye out for reported scams too. As awful as it may seem, knowledge of attack methods and techniques will hone your ability to separate fact from fiction. And then finally, consider using software apps that alert you to potential phishing calls, such as Truecaller or something like that. So how do we stop some of the other problems we mentioned? Tailgating. Well, this is all about people following you into sensitive areas in the workplace. So make sure all employees wear identity badges and that these badges are clearly visible. Secondly, you should make sure that you allow security doors and gates to close behind you because people love to nip in whilst the door or gate is still open and circumvent proper procedures. At one time, you used to be able to find lots of people stood outside a building smoking a cigarette. You could use an opportunity like that to strike up a conversation and then when lunch break is over, follow that person back into the building without them being any the wiser. Always be mindful, therefore, of who is in your wake. Finally, if you meet someone unexpected, there's no need to rugby tackle them to the floor. Sometimes just a polite "can I help you" or redirection to reception is enough. In terms of shouldering, it's possible to purchase privacy screens. Now, these will stop other people being able to see your laptop unless they're directly in front of it. I'm always surprised how little these are used in public places, especially when you're sat on a train or something like that. Again, another good idea is to lock your screen when your desktop or laptop is no longer in use. Finally, with baiting, never pick up and plug in any form of external storage. You never quite know what they contain. Finally, if you think you've been duped, ask for help. Changing passwords is always a great start, as is running antivirus software or something like that. But contacting the network team or the company in question is also really good advice.